What are the most basic consequences of corruption? Why does corruption matter if it's so ubiquitous? Why is there such a heavy anti corruption movement that happens around the world? If you're curious to find out the answers to any of these questions, then take a walk with me. I am a high priest of the Economicon, the Economancer, and with my economancy, I will unlock these dark secrets. So follow me. So, traditionally, people want to know what causes something, but in this circumstance, it's a little bit different because what causes corruption is a rather complex set of circumstances, right? I mean, it can be values, institutional constraints, all of these other different uh, social actions that are happening within some system. So for me, it's a lot simpler, as well as a lot more exciting to find out the consequences of corruption. Now, today's list is by no means exhaustive, but it should highlight some of the most notorious results. So today's focus we're going to be on low economic growth, low investment, low trust, and poor education. As you can already tell, there seems to be a good bit of interdependence in these, indicators. So, like, why does corruption dampen growth? Well, when we use resources and we're allocating them for some level of efficiency, um, it makes sense in economic theory that corruption negatively impacts growth by, sanding the wheel, which is something we talked a little bit about last episode. So what does it mean for sanding the wheel? So first of all, it's a metaphor on if you have a wheel that's spinning and you apply sandpaper to it, two things are happening. You're applying friction, which makes it go slower, so growth slows, and then two, it makes it smaller. So the actual zero sum game kind of argument actually happens in reality because there is an amount of the growth that's being swallowed up by the sandpaper, which is the corruption. Yeah, I mean, it's a good metaphor. Anyway, so what Sand the Wheel basically says is that corruption magnifies market failures and then interferes with the governmental corrections in the market. And so it becomes a governmental failure. And this compounds the prior market failure. So the big problem from an economist's point of view is that there is always an inefficient use of resources in a transaction that is modified by corruption. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's suppose you wanted to build a theme park. This would boost the local economy and make people happy because it's a theme park. Why would they not be happy? Right? But to win out the bid against the competition, you had to spend some of the investment on paying local and state politicians, right? So what now? We have this monetary loss, even if it's minimal, is still more harmful than if no competitors, including yourself, spent money on the bribes. So even if the best company wins, and there are no problems that arise after the initial bribe, the bribe money from each of these firms could have been spent more efficiently in other types of investments and in other places in the market. So this misallocation from the bribe, in total, it reduces the economy and society's social welfare due to that deadweight loss. Now, here's another part: low investment. One of the causes of low growth is the lack of foreign and domestic investment. So corruption reduces the incentives to invest in a few ways. First, by increasing the country's risk assessment. So, corrupt governments tend to have unstable political regimes and internal conflict, such as like outright civil war or even like a cold civil war, right? Second, a firm where they have like a corruption culture will fear that this will spill over to not only their workforce but all their corporate also their corporate governance structure. So if this corporate governance is living in this culture of corruption, you're going to have like these lower productivity rates from your workers. Then you're going to have, lower rates when it comes to being able to apply yourself to other countries, getting contracts over there and stuff like that. And third, this leads to the next topic of low trust. So, a firm will not trust a highly corrupt government to not interfere with their business, which raises the question about investment. Why invest any capital, whether it's human or physical, if you have a high risk of no return on your investment? So, low trust. One of my favorite quotes about trust is that trust is the glue of life. It is the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It is the foundational principle that holds all relationships. So, as a result, trust plays a vital role in defining our choices, how we see the rules concerning social action. An example, suppose your society lacks trust, then you're going to have exchange go down because you don't trust the person you're trading with. You're going to have credit go down because you don't trust the person you're willing to give credit for. Investment goes down because one, there's less credit, two, there's less exchange, and three, you're unsure about the likelihood of your investment having a return. And then last, it reduces how a culture perceives social inequality. So a place with high levels of distrust, they actually like social inequality. Now, this isn't a rule that can be applied to all of these, right? So every single thing that I'm pointing out is what we see on average. Now, the last thing is poor education. Poor education stands out here because it is a symptom of the other problems, right? So low investment could lead to low educational investment from either private or governmental enterprise. And this furthers this education to market mismatch. If you're in areas of low trust, you're going to have like this dichotomy of the student and the parent, right? So parents are going to trust teachers, students aren't going to have as much trust for teachers. And so all of this kind of has this compounding effect of not being able to trust some stuff. And then this chaotic battle, that again, this introduction of uncertainty and risk, this makes it hard for students to learn. So even if the education, quote unquote, is good, the student's relationship to that education may be really bad. And then last, if you have low economic growth, then you're not going to have as many resources to allocate to education as a general rule. However, if you want to look at some of the internal but direct effects from corruption to poor education outcomes, I implore you to go and watch the new Discourse podcast. It's an episode called Equity and the Unmaking of UT Austin. There's a lot of good information regarding some of the corruption and problems that are happening in higher education right now. Now, from this, we can kind of take this Orwellian perspective, right? You can also think that the height of corruption is not to give anyone a proper and critical education. So you can do this by censoring the opposition, such as burning books and reducing the information taught. You can also do this through like outright indoctrination. Now, there's another side to this of corruption, and it comes through poor teaching practices or poor pedagogy. The United States, we've consistently had a problem with teachers' unions not firing teachers that are bad, and this compounds this inferior education that's being taught to students, and then so on and so forth. So, all of these things, all of these different types of corruption, negatively impact our day-to-day lives. Um, and so again, this isn't an exhaustive list. None of these things are also set in stone. But these are, in my opinion, some of the most considerable consequences of corruption. And they're low growth, low investment, low trust, and poor education. If you're looking at an economic system and you're saying this is really bad, how do I judge this, et cetera, et cetera? By saying, I have a really poor education system, I'm not having much growth in my economy and all of these things. If your economy has that, your economy is struggling. So that is why we have this important structure going on in the world right now where we're trying to facilitate all of these anti-corruption policies because these necessarily help reduce those negative consequences. Now, There's a lot to be said about anti-corruption policies in our day-to-day lives. Sometimes they may make things more inefficient. Sometimes you have very corrupt people within these anti-corruption realms. And all of this has to be taken into account. And I think it's something that we'll probably spend some time on. I'm thinking the next video is probably going to be on grease the wheel rather than sand or grind the wheel hypothesis. We're really going to jump into that, and we're going to look about why would it happen? Why would there be a grease the wheel if there's so much easily available information? I mean, from what I just gave you on sand the wheel, that makes perfect sense. But remember that we exist in a world that is a structured world that has functional systems. So if you can think about it that way, then you can start coming up with ideas about why a structural functionalist would see some benefits, not always, some benefits to corruption. And with that, once again, I'm the high priest of the Economicon, the Economancer. Please like, share, subscribe, comment down below any questions, as well as any criticisms of me. Please lay them down there. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. Have a good one.